Welcome back to another Python tutorial. In today's video, we're going to update our Space Invaders game and add a few more features to it. So one of the features that we're going to add is what you see in front of me, which is a start menu. This menu is going to include the title of the game, the high score, and a message that says press space to start. Once you actually start the game, we have a couple new things here as well. So in the top left hand corner, we have a level, and in the top right hand corner, we have score. And the way this is going to work, it's pretty self-explanatory. Whenever you hit one of the enemies up in the sky, you're going to get points. Once you clear off all the enemies on the screen, then you're going to go to the next level. In this video, we're going to talk about how to increase difficulty for the next level by doing different things like increasing the enemy's speed, maybe having the enemies shoot more bullets, or increasing the health of the enemies. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can do this using Python's pygame. Alright, so since it's been quite some time since we did the last Space Invader video, I just want to spend a few moments going through the code just as a quick refresher. So at the top here, we imported pygame and the random library. This is the window setup where we set the dimensions of the window and also the window caption. Here we're loading in a background image, which we did in part 5 of the Space Invader series. Here we define some colors that we use later on in the game, and here we're using the red, green, and blue color mode. Down here is the different classes for the different objects in the game. So we had one for the ship. We had one for the enemies, which is the objects we're trying to shoot. We had a class for the bunkers, which help to protect the ship from incoming bombs. We had a missile class, which is what the ship shoots. We had a bomb class, which is what the enemy shoots. And then down here, we have a couple lines of code that create the ship. We have different groups where we're storing the different objects in the game. And then down below that, we have some for loops that create the enemies, some for loops to create the bunkers, and then our redraw function, which is how we draw and update all the action in the game. Down here is the while loop, which contains the main code for the game. So we have some different things like keyboard movement for the left and right arrow. For the spacebar, we set that up so that whenever the spacebar is pressed, it shoots a missile. Below the movement section, we have another section that controls how the enemies shoot. Down below that, we have some different collision detections, such as when the missile hits different objects in the game, and then when the bomb hits different objects in the game. Down here is the condition for ending the game, which is if the ship runs out of lives, or we run out of enemies. Alright, so let's go ahead and pick it up from here, and what we're going to start to do is add that start menu. Alright, so to get started creating this start menu, what we're going to do first is define a new variable, and we're going to put this variable above the while loop. And for this variable, we're going to say playing. And in the beginning, it's going to be equal to false. So we're going to say equal to and false. And the basic idea for this is we're going to divide this section under the while loop into two different parts. One part is going to run when the playing variable is equal to true, and the other part is going to run when it's equal to false. So when playing is equal to true, we actually want to have the game running, where the user can actually control the ship and shoot the missiles. So what we're going to do is highlight that section of code. So that's going to be from the movement controls all the way down to the ending condition. We're going to press the tab button. We're going to scroll back up, and right above movement controls here, we're going to add an if statement. We're going to say if playing. So what's going to happen is if playing is equal to true, then it's going to run this section of code down here, which is the main code for the game. If it's not equal to true, then we're going to define an else statement that we'll do in just a second, and we'll have some separate code for that section. What we're going to do first, though, is go up to the redraw function. And we're also going to divide the redraw function into two different sections, when playing is equal to true, and when it's equal to false. So the section that we want to divide in this case starts with the bottom variable, and it's going to go all the way through the draw objects, and it's going to end just above the pygame.display.update. So go ahead and highlight that section and press tab. And then we're going to add an if statement for this section as well. So we'll say if playing, and then the colon. And then here we're going to define the else statement. So right above pygame.display.update, we're going to say else. And then all we're going to put for this else statement for now is just a title. So what I'm going to do is go up to this section right here where we define the game title already. I'm going to copy it and paste it down below. We're going to be updating this in just a second, but we're going to go ahead and just run the code and see what happens. Okay, so right now when I run the code, I don't have any game objects on the screen. I just have the background and the title. So what we're going to do next is set it up so that when the user presses the spacebar, it goes into the main code. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to head under the while run loop. We're going to copy this section right here because we're going to be using it in just a second. And then down here, right above the redraw function, we're going to say else. Inside the else statement, we're going to paste that line of code. And then we're going to say if key, and then square bracket, pygame, dot k, underscore space, all capital. And then we're going to close the square bracket and put a colon. So if the space bar is pressed, then what we want to do is set playing equal to true. So when we do that, when playing is equal to true, then it's going to make this section of code up here run. And that'll bring us into the main part of the game. So let's go ahead and run the code and check this out. So right now it's just on my basic start menu, which we're going to update later on. When I press the space bar, then it brings me to the actual game. The next thing we're going to do is update the code so that when the ship runs out of lives, instead of stopping the game, it's going to go back to the start menu. So to do that, we're going to go down to where we define the ending conditions for the game. So that's this section right here. So in this section right here, what we're going to do is rather than set run equal to false, which will close the game, we're going to set our other variable, which we defined as playing. And we're going to set that equal to false. So once playing goes back to false, it's going to go back to the start menu. So right now, the conditions that's going to cause that are when the ship runs out of lives and when you clear off all the enemies. We're going to be updating this later in the video so that when you clear off all the enemies, it doesn't go back to the start menu, but rather it increases the level and also increases the difficulty. For now though, let's go ahead and try it out. I'm going to have my ship run out of lives so that we can see if it goes back to the start menu. Okay, and as soon as I run out of lives, it goes back to the start menu. So what we're going to do next is add a few more things to the start menu, such as the title, the high score, and also the start message. So to do that, we're going to head under the redraw function. And we're going to be working under this else statement here. So what we're going to be doing is creating 3 separate sections. The first one is the title. We're going to create another section for the high score. And then the final section will be the start message. I'm just going to go ahead and copy these lines of code and paste it under each section. You can have different variable names for each one if you want to, but it's not really necessary. So what I'm going to do first is update the font to one that I think looks a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is use this one right here. And then we'll just paste that for each font. I want to make the title quite a bit bigger, so instead of 30, I'm going to choose 60. And we'll go ahead and try that for each of the other ones as well. And I notice since we're going to be using the same font, I don't need this for each new section. If you want to update the font for each individual section, then go ahead and keep it. But I'm going to use the same font style for each one. Okay, so the next thing we need to update is where these are going to appear on the screen. So this location for the title is good. I'm going to drop it down a little bit and use 50 instead of 25. For this one, I want it to be in the center of the screen for both the X and the Y. So the X is already centered, so I'm going to use that for the Y. For this one, I want it to be centered on the X, but toward the bottom. So for this, I'm going to use 700. All right, so let's go ahead and run the code and see how this looks. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So what we're going to do next is update the text for each of these and maybe change some colors. So for the high score, what I'm going to do is put high score. And then for the last one, I'm going to say press space to start. For the colors, I'm going to make the title and the start message green, and then I'll leave the high score as white. Alright, so that looks pretty good to me. So the next thing we're going to add is the level caption up in the top left-hand corner, and then the score up in the top right-hand corner. So to add those, that's going to be under the if statement, under the redraw function. We're going to have two more categories like we did before. So for the first one, this is going to be the level. And for the other one, we're going to do the score. I'm going to copy everything except for the font variable and paste it under each section. I'm going to update the font to the one we used before. For the level, I want this to appear on the top left-hand corner. So instead of this, let's go ahead and try 100. And then for the score, it's going to be the opposite. I want this to appear in the top right-hand corner. So the maximum is 750. So let's try 650. All right, so let's go ahead and run the code and see how this looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and update the text now to levels and score. So for the level section, I'm going to update this to level. And then for the score section, we're going to update it to score. Alright, so that looks okay. You can adjust the spacing if you want to, if you want this a little bit closer to the edge. You can do that by just making this number right here a little bit smaller. So if you want to try something like 50 instead, we'll go ahead and see how that looks. So that's a little bit off the screen, so maybe 75. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to change it back to 100 because I think I like that the best, but you're welcome to space things out however you want to. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is creating some variables inside the ship class so that we can display the score and also the level. So we're going to scroll up to the ship class. And inside the init function for this class, we're going to say self.score. And that's going to be equal to 0 in the beginning. And then we'll say self.level. And that'll also be equal to 0. While we're here, let's go ahead and define the high score as well. So we'll say self.highscore. And also equal to 0. So now let's go back to the redraw function and update the code. So under the redraw function, we're going to start under the if playing statement. So now for the level section, we're actually going to add the value for the level. So we're going to do that by saying plus, and then we'll say ship.level. And if we try to run that, we're going to run into an error. So what we need to do is convert this into a string, and we can do that by saying str, and then putting ship.level inside of parentheses. Okay, it's going to be very similar for the score, so let's go ahead and copy it. And then we're going to paste it down below here. This time, instead of ship.level, we're going to change it to ship.score. And then we have one more section to update, which is the high score section right here. So next to high score, we're going to paste the same line. And this time we're going to say ship.highscore. So let's go ahead and run the code and check it out. So here on the start screen, we have a high score equal to 0. And then if we start the game, we have our levels with a value and also score with a value. Right now, if I shoot the ships, I'm not going to get any score. So that's the next thing we're going to work on. Okay, so to actually add score whenever one of the enemies gets destroyed, what we need to do is head under the while loop and locate this section right here. So this section right here defines what happens whenever a missile collides with an enemy. And what we have so far is we're going to remove the missile and also remove the enemy. So what we're going to add to this line is an update to the score, which we can do by saying ship.score. And then we can say plus equals and 1. Alright, so let's go ahead and check this out and see if it worked. So let's go ahead and start the game. And I just realized for the level part, we probably don't want that to say 0. And instead, we probably want it to say 1. So once we check out the score, then we'll go back and update that as well. So it looks like the score is working. Whenever I hit an enemy, it gives me a point up in the score category. Okay, so first let's go ahead and update that level mistake so that instead of 0, it says 1. So to fix that, it's in the ship class. So we're going to scroll up to the ship class, locate the self.level, and we're going to start that at 1. What we're going to do next is update the code so that if the enemies get cleared off the screen, it's going to increase the level by 1. So scrolling down, we're going to head back under the while loop. So this line of code right here is what happens whenever the enemies are all destroyed. So what we want to do is instead of setting playing back equal to false and going back to the start menu, we're going to increase the levels by 1. So to do that, we're going to split this off into a different if statement. So I'm just going to copy this right here. And then we can delete the or statement. And then we're just going to create a separate if statement down below here. So we'll say if the length of enemy list is equal to 0. Then what we're going to do is say ship.level. And then we'll say plus equals and 1. Alright, so let's go ahead and run the code and we'll check to make sure this is working. Okay, so as soon as I clear off all the enemies, we'll take a look and see if the levels increase. Okay, and we see that the levels are increasing, but it's continuing to increase. So the way we're going to fix that is as soon as we destroy all the enemies, we're going to redraw them all on the screen. The reason we're having that issue is because as long as the enemy list is equal to 0, we're going to increase the levels by 1. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to redraw all the enemies on the screen. And to make that a little bit easier, what we're going to do is scroll up to the section where we draw all the enemies. So that's this section right here. And what we're going to do is turn this into a function so that whenever we want to redraw the enemies, we can just call the function. So we're going to say def for define, and then we'll say make underscore enemies. And then we'll put parentheses and a colon. And then we'll need to highlight this section of code and press tab. And then down below this, we're going to call the function to create the enemies. So we'll say make underscore enemies. And then we're also going to call the function whenever the enemies get destroyed. So that'll be this section right here. So whenever all the enemies get destroyed, we're going to create a new batch of them by saying make underscore enemies. Alright, so let's go and check this out, make sure it works. Okay, so we have the enemies on the screen, so we know the function worked. So let's go ahead and clear them all out and see if they respawn once they're all destroyed. Okay, so this will probably do it. Okay, so all the enemies are destroyed, and as soon as they were, then the new batch of them appeared. So the next thing we're going to do is work on some different ways to increase the difficulty whenever you increase the score. So the first way that we're going to increase the difficulty is by increasing the speed of the enemies. The speed of the enemies is controlled under the enemy class, so let's go ahead and scroll up and locate that section. So this section right here controls the movement for the enemies, and the actual speed that they're moving is controlled by this line right here. So to update this so it corresponds to the level, there's a couple different things you can do. What I'm going to do, just to keep it kind of simple, is we're going to say ship dot level. And then here you can choose maybe either addition or multiplication. I'm going to choose multiplication. So what this is going to do, it's going to take the current level for the game. So we're starting that equal to 1. So for the direction, it's going to be 1 times 5, which will be the original 5. Once it gets to level 2, then self.direction will be equal to 2 times 5, so the speed will be 10. And then every time the level increases, it's going to increase the speed. So this is one way that you can connect the level of the game to the speed of the enemies. And let's go ahead and take a look and see how this looks. Okay, so this is the default speed. And rather than try to clear out all the enemies, what I'm going to do is just increase the starting level. So if I go under the ship class and we start this off at maybe level 5. Then when you start the game now, you can see the enemies are moving much faster. So depending on how long you want your game to last, doing multiplication might increase the speed too quickly. So that's where you can try different things like addition and adjusting the number right here. So another way that you can increase the difficulty of the game is have the enemies drop more bombs more often. So this section of code right here is what we use to define how the enemies shoot the bombs. And the chance right here, so right now it's about 25% of the time any particular enemy will shoot a bomb. So to increase this, what we're going to do is define a variable. And we're just going to go ahead and stick this variable right up here. And for this, we'll just say bomb underscore chance. And this is going to be equal to ship dot level. So kind of like what we did before. And then what we can do is we can either add or multiply some number to this. I would recommend probably doing addition. That way it doesn't increase too quickly. So you can do something like maybe plus 10. So what this is going to do, the initial value will be 1 plus 10, which will be 11. So 11% of the time the enemy will drop a bomb. So what we need to do next is update this if statement so that rather than having the number 25, we're going to say bomb underscore chance. So this is another thing that you can play around with to either increase or decrease the amount of bullets that the enemies shoot. Alright, so let's go and take a look and see how this looks. So right now this is level 5 and we can see that they don't shoot very many bullets. So instead of addition, you may want to consider multiplication. So let's take a look and see how that looks. So this time, rather than adding 10 to the level to get the bomb chance, we're going to multiply by 10. So level 1 will have a 10% chance. Level 2 will have 20% and so on. So obviously once you get to level 10, you're going to have a 100% chance and they'll be shooting a lot of bullets. But let's just go and take a look and see how this looks. So I went ahead and reset it back to level 1. And we can see on level 1, they're not shooting too many bullets. So now let's go and change this to level 10. And at level 10, it looks like the movement is much too fast. So I'm going to lower that number by a little bit. So self.direction, I'm going to change it from 5 to maybe something like 2. Okay, so we can see that the movement's a little bit better, and we can also see that there's quite a bit more bullets on the screen. Okay, so both those items, the speed and also the amount of bullets that get shot, are things that you can play around with and fine-tune. So the last method that we're going to take a look at to increase the difficulty is to give the enemies lives, so that you might have to shoot them multiple times before they actually die. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to actually give the enemies lives in the game is we're going to go to the enemy class and define a lives variable for the enemy. So we'll say self.lives, and let's give them 3 lives. So that means that you have to hit the enemies 3 times before they die. And if you want to tie this into the level of the game, then what you can do is rather than give them a set number of lives, you can say something like ship.level. And what that's going to do, it's going to set the enemy's lives equal to the level of the game. So at level 1, you just have to hit them 1 time. And then by the time you get to level 5 or 6, then you have to hit them 5 or 6 times. Alright, so there's another section in the code that we need to update to make this work. So we're going to go down to the while loop. And we're going to find the section that deals with missiles hitting the enemies. And that's this section right here. So this line right here says that whenever a missile collides with an enemy, we're going to remove the enemy. But what we're going to do instead is actually subtract 1 from their lives. So we're going to say enemy.lives. And then we're going to do minus equals 1. So we're going to subtract 1 from it. And then if it gets to 0, then that's when we're going to remove the enemy. So to do that, I'm going to say if enemy.lives is less than or equal to 0, Then we're going to remove the enemy. So we're just going to click to the left of this line and press tab. Alright, so let's go ahead and check this out. So I'm going to start us at level 3, so that we have to hit the enemies 3 times before they die. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to send up some bullets. And it looks like they don't die right away, but after 3 hits, that's when they die. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is actually updating the high score whenever you run out of lives. So we want to update the high score whenever the ship runs out of lives. So that's going to be under this section right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if ship dot score is greater than ship dot high score. So if the current score is greater than the high score, then what we're going to do is we're going to set the high score equal to the current score. So we're going to do that by saying ship dot high score is equal to ship dot score. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this out. So I'm just going to get a few points, and then I'll let my ship die. Alright, and whenever we go back to the start menu, it updates the high score to 12. Let's go and play one more time. I'll get a score higher than 12, and we'll see if it updates. Uh-oh. So it looks like we have a minor glitch. So whenever I press the spacebar, it glitches back to the start menu automatically. So probably what we're going to have to do is whenever the ship runs out of lives, before we restart the new game, we're also going to have to restart the ship's lives. So let's go ahead and go back to the code and see if we can fix that. So right here, down below this line, let's go ahead and reset it back to 3 by saying ship.lives is equal to 3. Okay, so my ship died, and let's go ahead and press spacebar and see if it goes back into it normally. Okay, so now we're just going to add a few more final updates before we end with this video. So we're going to start under the else statement, and what we're going to do first is we're going to say bomb list dot empty. So what this is going to do is while the game is on the start menu, it's going to clear all the bombs off the screen, so that when the player presses the spacebar to restart the game, they're not going to be all over the place. They're going to restart from the enemies. The next thing that we want to do is reset some of the values. So the first thing that we want to reset is the level. So we're going to say ship.level is equal to 1. We're also going to reset the score by saying ship.score. That's going to be equal to 0. And then we're also going to reset the enemy's health if you're going to use that. So we'll say enemy dot lives, and we'll set that back equal to 1. We also want to redraw all the bunkers, so to do that we're going to go up to the bunker section and turn it into a function. So just like we did for the enemies, we're going to say def for define. We'll say make underscore bunkers. We're going to call the function once right here. So we'll say make underscore bunkers. And then down back under the else statement, what we're going to do first is we're going to clear it out, and then we're going to redraw it. So we say bunker underscore list dot empty. And then we're going to redraw it by saying make underscore bunkers. There may be a few more things we have to do, but let's go ahead and check it out at this point and see how it looks. Okay, so for the function, I forgot the parentheses, so let's fix that real quick. So here we need parentheses for the function. And here we're running into another issue. So I think this is caused because the actual enemy objects have not been created yet. So let's go ahead and move this line of code. And we'll put it right up here. So whenever the ship gets destroyed and we have a game over, then in addition to setting the ship's lives equal to 3, and I think this was actually 5 to begin with, but it doesn't really matter, you can set it to whatever you want to. So in addition to that, we're also going to reset the enemy lives. So let's see if that works a little better. Okay, so everything appears pretty good. So we have level is equal to 1, we have a score of 0. So let's just get a few points. And then I'll go ahead and have my ship die. Okay, so it updates the high score. And now let's go ahead and press spacebar and see if it resets the score. So one issue we still have is we need to redraw all the enemies because 2 are missing from the last round. So let's go ahead and do it just like the bunkers. We're going to empty it and then redraw it. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so I destroyed some of the enemies, and let's go ahead and have my ship die. Okay, and then we'll restart. Alright, so the enemies are redrawn on the screen. So the last thing we'll check for is let's go ahead and go to level 2, and then we'll see if the level restarts. Okay, so we made it to level 2, so let's go ahead and have the ship die, and then we'll see if the levels reset. Okay, so I have the high score, which is good, so we'll press spacebar. We're back to level 1, and we have a score of 0. Alright, so it seems like everything is working, but just in case I missed something and when you're testing it you run into an issue, just go and let me know in the comments and I can help you out with it and update the code. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed and stay tuned for the next one.